Hello, my name is Andraos. Thank you for joining us for the latest Kumi Now online gathering as we address the environment in Palestine and the impact of occupation on it. We are joined today by Dr. Mazin Qumsiyeh of the Palestinian Museum of Natural History and Palestine Institute for uh, Biodiversity and Sustainability at Bethlehem University. Before we start, I'd like to remind you that this session is being broadcast live on Facebook. If you don't wish to appear, please turn off your video feed. We'd also love it if you could quickly share one of the links that are being shared on chat so that others may join. I'd now like to let Dr. Mazin Qumsiyeh introduce himself and begin his presentation. We will let him speak for as long as he wants. Then I will ask him your questions from chat. Please take it away.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the invitation. I will share my screen now and start speaking. I hope you can see my screen. There we go. All right. So by way of introduction, I'm Mazin Qumsiyeh. I'm a professor at Bethlehem University, founder of the Palestine Institute for Biodiversity and Sustainability. I lived in the US for many years, longer than I care to remember. And I was a professor at places like Duke and Yale universities. And I came back to Palestine in 2008, where my wife and I donated later to Bethlehem University some money to start this museum and institute, etc. And my background is eclectic. It includes biology, biodiversity, human rights, genetics, medical genetics. I dabble in many things. I'm as I say, jack of all trades, master of none, if you want. I am, though, focused on, basically from my childhood, I was focused and very interested in human diversity and in biodiversity. And I think the two are linked. And we'll talk a little bit about how colonialism is also anti-diversity, if you want. But I think, what we aim to do, for example, at our institute, Palestine Institute for Biodiversity and Sustainability, is sustaining human and natural communities in Palestine. All right, where is Palestine? Palestine is a very important area. It's at an intersection of continents. Humans migrated out of Africa through Palestine about 100,000 years ago. So many of you are also have Palestinian ancestry, if you want, and then traveled to the rest of the world, like the Americas, Europe, Eurasia, etc. But even today, birds migrate through Palestine. Annual migrations, over 500 million birds pass through Palestine on annual migrations. Palestine being so centrally located is one thing, but it is also geographically, geologically very important area. It's at the Rift Valley, so it has very rich soils. And that's why it was also part of the Fertile Crescent, the western part of the Fertile Crescent, where humans first developed agriculture, domesticated plants and animals. And before 1948, 70% of Palestinians were subsistence farmers, depending on agriculture. Palestine is also rich in biodiversity. It's actually one of the hot biodiversity areas in the world. And you can see it's a Mediterranean basin biodiversity zone. The West Bank, where I am at, and unfortunately I'm squeezed into the West Bank, can't travel many places, including part of the West Bank, which is Jerusalem. We're not allowed to get to Jerusalem. But the West Bank is about 20% of the land of Palestine.
Mazin,
And it has rich biodiversity and rich habitats, lots of water courses. We have plenty of resources. Again, the western part of the Fertile Crescent, if you want. And you can see here for the whole of Palestine, there's actually areas critical for biodiversity conservation. And we in the West Bank are now engaged in mapping out the protected areas. We'll revise all these key biodiversity areas that you see on the right side. We're going to restudy them and redefine them. And this rich biodiversity includes many animals, many plants. This is basically a summary of what we have. We have, over 2,000 species of plants. We have thousands of species of animals. Most of them, of course, are vertebrates. We do have about 400 species of birds, 92 species of mammals. This is the West Bank alone, by the way. West Bank and Gaza, maybe. Of course, in historic Palestine, there's even more. Of course, to protect this rich biodiversity, we follow the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which, as you know, focus on both protecting people and protecting nature. For example, there are 17 goals. And you can see, for example, goal 13 related to climate action, goal 14 related to below water issues, 15 land on water, life on land, biodiversity on land. There is issues of peace, justice, etc. These are the UN Sustainable Development Goals, as I call them. Unfortunately, most countries fail to achieve them or even come close to protecting their nature and their wildlife and so forth. And of course, in Palestine, the situation is even more devastated because of settler colonialism. I'm not going to talk here about the political issues or explain about these things and settler colonialism, but you are very familiar with it anyway, and most of you are, of course, know the Palestinian history and know what had happened and how today, for example, some 8 million Palestinians are refugees or displaced people of a total population of 14 million people. What I am concerned about and what I do want to focus on in this talk is the issue of the environment. And of course, the environment globally is devastated, not just in Palestine. Global environment has been remarkably damaged due to human activities. There are five major threats: climate change, pollution, habitat destruction, overexploitation, invasive species. And in our case of Palestine, we can add settler colonialism, which not many countries still face, although some countries faced in the past, of course. And for example, settler colonialism in the US, as you know, was accompanied by significant environmental destruction. For example, the European colonizers killed 2 million buffaloes or more to deprive the natives of their food, but that had a devastating impact on biodiversity because all things depend on all things. So when you remove one component like 2 million buffaloes, what does that do to not just to human populations, native Americans, but also to wildlife like wolves or the habitats that the the buffalo used to feed on. So always settler colonialism is damaging to the environment. Let me just take a few examples from Palestine. When Israel was created in 1948, they destroyed 530 Palestinian villages and towns, ethnically cleansed them. Part of the destruction was basically destroying the houses and destroying the trees around the villages. That included bulldozing, for example, farms and lands. That include both domesticated plants and wild plants. Domesticated plants like carobs and figs and almonds and olives and so on, and wild plants like hawthorn and oaks and other wild trees. And and in place of these, the European colonizers in Palestine, European Jews, planted pine trees, European pine trees, Pinus halepensis, and this is an interesting change from a polyculture, if you want, to a monoculture. Monoculture, of course, is not very good for biodiversity. And also pine trees shed leaves that are acidic, that do not allow growth of underforest growth like other trees. So this was environmentally devastating. The other thing about pine trees is that they are flammable, and there has been a lot of fires here in West Jerusalem, for example, or in the Galilee, where people have lost a lot of trees that were planted. In this case, in West Jerusalem this past summer, you can see that the trees that were burned actually exposed the Palestinian terraces that our ancestors have built. And of course, the Palestinians were ethnically cleansed from this area of West Jerusalem, which is now all Jewish. Another aspect of environmental settler colonialism impact was the diversion of the waters of the Jordan Valley from Lake Tiberias to the west. This resulted in the drying up of the Jordan Valley, and this has caused shrinkage of the Dead Sea, but it also caused desertification around the Jordan Valley, which you can see even in satellite images on the right. There was also the Zionist project to drain the wetlands of the Hula, which happened in the 1950s, and this has caused the disappearance of 219 species in these wetlands that used to use these wetlands. There is issues of natural resources and unequal distribution of natural resources. For example, water. We do not have a shortage of water here. We actually have plenty of water. What we have is unequal distribution, as you see in the figure, where you have basically, the Israeli settlers get many times many more folds of water than the Palestinians, who end up getting less than what the World Health Organization recommends for healthy living, which is 100 liters per person per day. That includes, of course, everything, agriculture, everything else. There is the stealing of the water resources, one thing, but other resources have been stolen. For example, Israel took the gas fields that rightfully belong to the native people here and stole them. And even Gaza, Israel is besieging Gaza and blockading it primarily because of the gas fields off of Gaza. So that's why Gaza fishermen are not allowed to go more than 6 miles, 6 nautical miles into the Mediterranean Sea. There is other places like here, Jabal Abu Ghnaim. This used to be the only forested area between Bethlehem and Jerusalem. And what you can see what it looked like in 1997 at the top, and what it is now, which is an Israeli Jewish-only colony called Har Homa. And this has a devastating impact, among other things like the wall, etc., on the wildlife in the Bethlehem region. And we published a paper actually on decline in vertebrate biodiversity in the Bethlehem region. There's both industrial and other settlements and other effects of colonization. I'll try to be brief, but you can see, for example, Israeli worst polluting industries were relocated after 1967 to the West Bank and were put next to Palestinian areas, dumping their toxic waste on us. And this has caused significant health issues for us. Cancer rates in the West Bank are going up. Congenital birth defects. This is my field of medical genetics, by the way. Congenital birth defects, infertility, skin disorders, etc. And some of my master students did work on this, like Khulud Hamad on the genotoxic effect of the Barkan industrial settlement. There's also trucking of Israeli waste to the West Bank, including, by the way, nuclear waste, biological waste, like from hospitals, etc., that are crossing the green line and coming to be dumped in the Palestinian areas. In some cases, we have collaborating Palestinians who allow this and encourage it. For example, in the town of Idna, they receive a lot of the Israeli electronic waste, and they even burn it and to extract things like copper and other things from this. This is, of course, illegal according to international law to truck waste across borders. But this is happening all the time. Even as I speak to you, dozens of trucks are crossing from Jerusalem to the village of Tqu' here, bringing us hazardous waste, chemicals, biological, etc. There's a local, damage to trees and other things, and we can talk endlessly about this. Palestinians try to cling to what's left of their agricultural land. And so I think we have to think about this. Now, I want to just tell you a small example here from Bethlehem. This is, the map of the area of Bethlehem, Beit Jala. Oops, sorry. Let me just minimize this so you can see. So here's Bethlehem on the right, and Beit Jala and Al-Khadr. These are Palestinian communities. There's Al-Walaja, there's Batir and Hussan, there's Wadi Fukin and Nahalin on the left. These are all Palestinian communities of the Western Bethlehem region. The whole Bethlehem district has 220,000 people in it, 70,000 Palestinians from those 220,000 native people. 70,000 are refugees or displaced people. They live in 3 refugee camps within the Bethlehem area. So about a third are refugees. Then Israel is building a wall and excluding most of the Bethlehem district from the land of Bethlehem, from the people of Bethlehem. And actually the Palestinians in Bethlehem have access to only 15% of their original lands. 85% are now for the use of these settlements like Har Homa, which is to the north, which I showed you the picture of it. And then there's Gilu. The Har Homa is to the right. Sorry, it's not showing here. But then there's Gilu, Har Gilu. There's the Tqu' and other settlements, the Gush Etzion settlement blocks. These are shown in dark blue colors. and they control most of the area of Bethlehem district, which Bethlehem district stretches to the Dead Sea. Now, this area that I'm showing you, Batir and Hussan, is a World Heritage Site. We designate it as a World Heritage Site because it has ancient forms of agriculture. The people of Batir have been cultivating that land probably from the dawn of agriculture 11,000 years ago, and has been continuously inhabited throughout these 11,000 years. So obviously this is a very important heritage site of the area of Batir and Hussan and the valley that's around them. This is the valley, and we set up, as you can see, some ecotourism trails in this. The valley is in area C. I don't know if most of you know what area A, B, and C is. Most of the West Bank is area C, which means full Israeli control over civil and military and security affairs. Area A is supposedly an area they turn to the Palestinians for civil and security administration. But of course, this is fake, since Area A is also under direct Israeli military and security control. So really, they mean nothing. It's just on the books. So they say we're giving them autonomy in Area A, which includes the city of Bethlehem and the two cities, Beit Jala and Beit Sahur, which is my village. Now, I find it remarkable that most of the West Bank was allowed to continue to be direct Israeli control even after the PLO signed the Oslo Accords nearly 30 years ago. This only prolonged the occupation. Area B, by the way, was intermediate supposedly between Area A and Area C. But anyway, Israel is now building settlements. Even in Area C here, they just started a new settlement, just where the arrow is. I don't know if you see my arrow, but it's right here. They started a new settlement right at the beginning of the trail here. And this settlement will grow to take up most of this hill here, overlooking the valley with the basically ecotourism paths that we set up and marked. This is just a microcosm of the realities that we face here in terms of the environmental issues. I didn't talk about any of the political issues, and the situation here with the settlements or anything else. Okay, now what is the solutions? The solutions is to create sustainable human and natural communities, as I mentioned, not to give up, but to work hard to try and do something about it. According to, as I mentioned, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, even though personally I'm not sure I want development, I prefer sustainability by itself without development. And that's another talk we can give another time, but it's going from the image you see at the bottom that says the ego, the human ego, where male dominance, colonial settlements, greed, etc., controlling other life forms, to where we take care of each other and we take care of the planet that we live in. We're trying to do this in a microcosm in this institute. This is a drawn image of the institute. You can see we have solar panels, we have greenhouses, we have a community garden, we have water rain harvesting systems. We have a museum of natural history, beginning of a museum of natural history, which will get much bigger next year because we just got funding for renovation of a new building and starting to enlarge it significantly. We also have an exhibit of cultural heritage and the way our ancestors have cultivated the land and used these instruments for thousands of years. And hopefully some of the tools and methods they used, we can revive, and we are trying to revive. Cultural heritage is not something of the past. Cultural heritage is something of the present and of the future, in my humble opinion. So we work with children a lot because they are the future. We try to set up education material for things like agriculture, climate change. Our education material is culturally sensitive, but also fun. For example, we set up a game even on that can be played on smartphones. We have animation videos for children. We work with farmers also to show them hands-on how they can increase their production. And we did show with 81 farmers in the Makhrur Valley, which is the valley that I told you is a World Heritage Site. We showed them that they could increase their production 40% over the period of the project, 2.5, almost 3 years. We worked with women cooperatives to not only produce organic material and organic products, but also how to market them and how to sell them. Here's some women, for example, taking a workshop here at the Institute about making household products, including soap and cosmetics and things like that from natural products. Our institute also has educational modules that we use for encouraging people to try different things, like a community garden. We have aquaponics where we grow fish and vegetables in the same place. We even brought some people from Gaza and showed them how to build these aquaponic systems. And they went back to Gaza and built them. I'm in touch with them and I showed that they can do this. Why did it freeze now? Can you all still hear me? Yeah.
Yes, yes, we can.
All right, thank you. And then, you know, with children, we have summer camps and other activities for children all the time. We work with children with the notion, the Chinese have a saying, I hear and I forget, I see and I remember, I do and I understand. So we want them to do things by hand so that they get, you know, to understand what's going on. So you can see exploring, touching, feeling, drawing, playing. All of these things are important ways for children to develop love of Palestine, love of nature, love of each other, diversity of humans, diversity of nature, and its importance. You can see they are proud of what they do. For example, the kid up on the upper right-hand corner who made these pickled olives after we picked the olives, etc. Even like kindergarten kids who drew something. Even you can see a girl dressed as a butterfly in the lower right-hand corner. There was a workshop on butterflies, so we want them to think what a butterfly needs and how we can protect butterflies. We care about humans, but we also care about animals. We have an animal rehabilitation unit where we try to rehabilitate and release animals. The last animal we released was a kestrel, and we try to rehabilitate some of them. Some of them don't make it and end up in our collection, but we try. And we have a research team and a volunteer team that's staff and others who are doing very good work, you know, and also enjoy this work. You know, I can tell you stories about each one of these volunteers. You know, Muhammad Najajra, upper right, left-hand corner, for example, working with Johanna in the herbarium. He came to us and volunteered when he was an undergraduate student in agriculture. And then he did his master's degree with me while I employed him at the Institute. And now he's a museum manager. Johanna came here was one of my students in the master program, and she's done remarkably well with plants and other things. She just delivered her baby, so she's in maternity leave. You know, Muhammad Abu Sarhan in the lower picture, smiling on the right with the wavy hair. He's now in London doing some training on molecular biology. And, you know, I could go on and on about these people. They are remarkable, good people that do very well. We have partnership with a number of organizations abroad and also locally, like locally with the Environment Quality Authority, Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Tourism, Ministry of Education, Higher Education, etc. Globally, we even got grants from National Geographic Society, the European Union, others to do various things. We are now working on two important things. We're reviewing the protected areas with the notion to change the protected areas and do them based on scientific principles, because Israel has designated protected areas in the West Bank based on political considerations, not based on scientific value. Political consideration meaning they want to exclude Palestinians from those areas. That's the only reason why they do it. And we are trying to come up with really good criteria for designation of protected areas. That's one thing we're working on. Other thing we are working on is a national biodiversity strategy and action plan. This is together with the Environment Quality Authority and hundreds of stakeholders and NGOs and other ministries. And the picture on the upper right-hand corner shows two of us, me and Ilyas Handal, with Dr. Isa and Mr. Muhammad Mahasna, who are from the Environment Quality Authority. Ilyas was another person that's worked here, volunteered in the bachelor degrees and then did his master degree with us, was employed here as a zoologist, and now he's doing his PhD with German university. So people again advance through working here. We also try to lobby and do other actions for the environment. We lobbied at the UN Climate Change Conference in the UK in 2021, and we lobbied at the China Biodiversity Conference that was held in Kunming. These are just some pictures of volunteers and visitors to the museum and institute, and some of the staff members. And of course, we welcome you to come and volunteer. Any of you can come and volunteer here. You will enjoy it. We do a lot of fun things. You can work in the garden, you can harvest olives, you can do apricot jam, as you can see in the lower right-hand corner. The group in the upper right-hand corner actually built this biogas unit in one day as volunteers. And, you know, you can see a lot of actions. We're actually tonight, we're having a nice dinner, zarb we call it, at the museum with the volunteers here. Some of them are with me here in the room, and see them attending. This is what the institute will look like in a couple of years, few years, hopefully, if I get all the money I need for everything. But I'll stop here probably. This is just some more pictures of what we do. And these are just some of our projects that are ongoing and what we do in the molecular lab, in the museum, in the institute, in the field, etc. So this is our website, PalestineNature.org. And you can email me at info@palestinenature.org. I'm happy to take any questions in the group.
Yes, and there are many questions. So the first one is, Mazin, what are the Palestinian and camaraderie Israeli NGOs doing to combat the environmental degradation of the West Bank and Gaza?
Sorry, say that again. I got distracted for a minute.
Okay. The question is, what are the Palestinian and camaraderie Israeli NGOs doing to combat the environmental degradation of the West Bank and Gaza?
Okay, in Gaza, you know, it's hard for me to even begin to talk about Gaza. Gaza is an environmental Nakba. If you know what the word Nakba means, catastrophe, it's what happened to Palestinians throughout the past 74 years. We call it the Nakba, beginning in 1948 with ethnic cleansing, but it's an ongoing Nakba, an ongoing catastrophe for the Palestinian population, because we have continuing ethnic cleansing, continuing killing, continuing destruction of lands and habitats and everything else. And this is throughout historic Palestine. But Gaza is this very small strip of land in the lower left-hand corner of Palestine, if you want. It's an open-air prison where 2.3 million Palestinians are living. Most of them are refugees from 1948 who were never allowed to return to their homes and lands. And so they're living in this crowded area that's semi-arid, and they've been denied every element of basic, you would consider it basic freedom or basic right, from the right to water, right to air, right to movement, right to everything. And occasionally, every 3 or 4 years, Israel bombs them to test new weapons on the people of Gaza. This is like a guinea pigs in a medical tests in the old days. So that's what they do. This is what Gaza is. And environmentally, it's catastrophic. 95% of the water of Gaza is not drinkable. It's saline and horrible. The aquifer is shrinking anyway. It's harder and harder to draw from the aquifer. But when you are able to draw from the aquifer that's beneath Gaza, the water is salty and not really drinkable. You can use it for some cooking and washing and stuff like that. But it's not enough also. Gaza, as you saw in the figure that I passed over quickly, actually gets less than half of what the World Health Organization considers healthy living in terms of water. Now, what are organizations doing about this? Compared to what needs to be done, I would say about less than 0.5%. So it's really, really low. We are in touch with some organizations that are, in fact, we had a workshop with one such organization this past Thursday, a few days ago, that's doing environmental work in Gaza. And I was so stunned, actually, I didn't know what to advise them, what to tell them, because I really don't know what can be done for Gaza. Well, we know what can be done in terms of the overall picture. You can help free Gaza, break the siege on Gaza, break the blockade on Gaza, take Israel to the International Criminal Court because they're violating basic human rights and engaging in war crimes and crimes against humanity in Gaza. It's a lot to be done from outside to pressure. That's where your role comes as people attending this talk, and I would hope that you would engage. But
Okay.
the people in Gaza are doing their best. God bless their souls. And what can I say?
Next question.
Yeah.
What sort of relationships do you have with environmental groups or museums from other countries? Which universities abroad have an agreement with Bethlehem University in your field of work?
Yes, we have several. We would like more. So if any of you want to help us network with more, we would love it. I mean, the last agreement we're just about to sign this coming tomorrow, maybe we'll sign it, is with the university in Malaysia. But we have projects, as I mentioned, with London, where Muhammad Abu Sarhan is now in London, with the university there, Cambridge, plus the Museum of Natural History, but also with the US, with Germany, with other groups. We have some cooperation, Natural History Museum in Paris, universities around the world that are willing to cooperate with us. With Jordan, I have very good working relationship with 2 universities. And we publish papers with the Jordan University of Science and Technology just. And, you know, there's a few here and there. With NGOs and others, we also work. For example, there's CBIOS, the Royal Belgian Society for Sciences, which we collaborate with, for example, on the protected area networks and stuff like that. Royal Society of London, which is obviously not academic, it's a kind of a society of scientists. We have with other NGOs, both locally and globally, we have partnerships. But the more the merrier, of course. We are isolated here. We could use all the help we can get.
Okay. Has Palestine signed and ratified the Biodiversity Convention?
Yes, we are signatory to actually 7 conventions related to biodiversity. The key one being the Convention Biological Diversity, CBD, and its annexes, including the Rio Convention and others, Cartagena protocols, etc. We are signatory on these. I actually think these are very important things to do. Unfortunately, the Palestinian Authority, when it signed these conventions, they did it just so that they can put their name as signatories to the conventions. They didn't understand that, one, they get some privileges which they should partake of, and 2, there are responsibilities associated with these conventions, that you have responsibility. And we are only recently, since I would say 2005, in Palestine, started taking these things seriously. Anyway, most of the conventions that Palestine signed in 2005. So really, in the past 7 years, we've been taking it seriously. And I'm finding that you can really benefit from these conventions. For example, when we signed the Convention on World Heritage and etc. with UNESCO, that World Heritage site, which I showed you in Al-Makhrur, it allowed us to designate it as a World Heritage Site, and it delayed, I wouldn't say it stopped colonial settlement activity, but it delayed colonial settlement activity, including building the wall in that region. Other questions? You're mute.
Sorry. What support do you get from international nature conservation organizations like IUCN?
We actually have a project now with IUCN, the Protected Area Network that I talked about. and re-looking at all the protected areas here is a project that is funded by the Critical Ecosystem Partnership Fund. This is a global, a European fund, but it's global, and it's funded to IUCN. Then IUCN subcontracted with us, with our institute here, to do the work on the protected area in Palestine. IUCN headquarters in Amman, so obviously they need a local partner. So we're their local partner to reevaluate and look at the protected areas using, of course, the IUCN criteria for protected area networks.
Okay, I know you said that there is actually plenty of water in the area. It was used fairly, and you talked about improvements to growing and irrigating crops. But how do you feel about growth in general in the Middle East? Are you concerned about a Malthusian trap, or will we keep innovating and improving our abilities to grow food and use water more efficiently?
I am concerned about this earth actually being able to sustain humans if we keep with the current greed system, capitalism, few people running the world basically. If we remain in that direction, then there's not going to be enough food to feed this planet because of the way that we are doing things, the way we are doing. Not that you cannot sustain 7.5 billion people, you can. And you can sustain them even in an environmentally sustainable way, but not the way we are doing it. For example, when you harvest a fruit in the US or in South America and ship it to the Philippines to be packaged and then ship it back to be sold in supermarkets in the US, this is crazy, okay? This is totally crazy. But of course, it's profitable for people. So people are benefiting. When you have a war on Ukraine, this is devastating to the environment. I mean, Ukraine, if you look at the picture of what's happening, it's horrible. But it's profitable. It's profitable to some people. Who are these people? The people that are selling the weapons, sending the weapons, using our tax money, US tax money. The US Congress just approved $40 billion of weapons. You know, the military, by the way, is one of the largest polluters on earth. So it's obviously not sustainable, but it's profitable. And I could give you many, many other examples like this. But the point that I'm trying to make is under the current system, I'm not just worried about the Arab world. I'm worried globally. Now, it is true that climate change, which most of it is caused by greenhouse gas emissions from developed countries like the US, like Canada, like Australia, like Europe. Most of the greenhouse emissions are caused by that, and Russia, of course. Yet, the impact of the climate change is going to be felt mostly where, unfortunately, in the so-called developing countries, or other people call us third world countries, as if we're third-class citizens or something of the world. This is the problem. This is the challenge that we face. The Arab world is particularly sensitive because, as you know, we have a large Sahara Desert that stretches not just from Morocco to Egypt, but it goes also into the Arabian Peninsula, Saudi Arabia, and all these countries. And these areas, which only at the periphery of them, which unfortunately Palestine, Tunis, Cyrenaica Mountains in Libya, Lebanon, these are the areas that are left in the Arab world that are still green or have ability to sustain and produce agriculture. In the south, one could talk about Sudan, for example, in the Arab world. Sudan alone could be a breadbasket of the Arab world. It could supply enough food to feed the whole Arab world. but it is not being used like that, and it's being played again for profit to feed the hungry billionaires who are not happy to have 10 billion or 50 billion. They want their 100 billion. And that's why we proceed.
How is older Palestinian youth made aware of the richness of a Palestinian land and biodiversity? Most live in cities or refugee camps.
I mean, this is precisely why we started this institution as primarily an educational institution, where we want to just get a lot of people to come here, where we, maybe I can use the word brainwash them, to be environmentally sensitive, etc. We try to do this. We now acquired a mobile educational unit, and this mobile educational unit, we just need a truck to pull it. We raised $8,200 towards buying the truck. We still need much more than that to pull this mobile educational unit, because our old truck is in the repair shop frequently and is breaking down. This mobile educational unit will allow us to reach tens of thousands of people. I would like to take it also to the marginalized Palestinian communities, like in the South Hebron Hills, Masafer Yatta, and those places. I'd like to take it to the Jordan Valley, to the community of Bedouins that are targeted, etc. Because I don't expect everybody to be able to come here to our institute. So we want to take the institute to them, basically. So we're working on this, and we are, and I know other, I mean, I don't want you to think that we're the only people working on this. There are other people and other institutions that are trying to educate and spread the word, including, I mentioned one in Gaza, for example. I'd like to help them more to do environmental work in Gaza, because I can't reach Gaza, not even with the mobile unit, or even in person. I cannot go to Gaza. I'm not even allowed to enter Jerusalem here, which is my city, only 4 kilometers away. I'm not allowed to enter it even with my American passport. So
Don Wagner asks, we will be visiting in mid-October and wonder if we can volunteer with you to pick olives.
definitely. We'd love it, and we'll feed you good food, maklouba, mansaf, whatever you want.
Good.
It's a lot of fun also. We have had volunteers from 47 countries, I believe, so far.
Genereva says, I visited Palestine, Israel in 2016. At that time, so much water was being sucked out of the Jordan River that the Dead Sea levels were dropping significantly, and major sinkholes were happening because the water levels underground were dropping and the salt content was causing collapse. Has this improved or increased?
This is still true, and it's getting worse and worse, because obviously as the Dead Sea shrinks, it gets lower, and it gets, the heat on it increases, and it's become like a, you know, what can I tell you? It's devastating. It's not just, I mean, I was reading about this stuff. People think the Dead Sea is dead. Actually, there's even Israeli studies that show that there was 12 species of algae in the Dead Sea, and now there's only 2 left. From the 1980s until now, only 2 algae left, and they are in the brackish areas of the Dead Sea. There is, of course, the issue of sinkholes, but we don't know the impact of these sinkholes on biodiversity. And actually, there's a person named Mark Schroeder who's interested in doing research on this, and I might help him to understand the impact. Maybe Benan here Also, we need to think about the impact of these sinkholes on plant biodiversity. Maybe we can write a paper about this. Banana is a plant expert. He's here with me. So there's lots of things to be done, to be investigated, to be researched. But more importantly, okay, after we research them, what are we going to do? What can we do? What can we do as Palestinians? What can we do as global international activists? And here I urge you to think of your role. So knowing is one thing, acting is another thing.
Okay. The map showed Nahalin being cut off from the West Bank by the barrier. What is the state of the building of a wall, please? I know that Tent of Nations is near there.
Nahalin actually is a village. Remember the guy I mentioned, Muhammad Najajra, who studied agriculture and then did his master with me and is now museum manager. Muhammad Najajra lives in Nahalin. He's building a house in Nahalin. So obviously the people of Nahalin are not giving up and they still resist and they still build, and he built a family. He actually met his wife, future wife, when he was a volunteer here and she was a volunteer. We had, by the way, this is an encouragement for you guys who are single who want to volunteer here. We had so far 4 or 5 marriages as a result of volunteering here. You tend to meet a lot of people. So, so anyways, he met South and his wife, and now they have a kid who's 1.5 years old. His name is Kian. And they live, they have a house here, but they also they're building a house in Nahalin. They have a house near the museum here, and they have a house in Nahalin. So I think it will be very interesting to see what happens if and when Israel decides to block the people of Nahalin or Batir or Hussan or any of those areas from going back and forth to Bethlehem. I think that will be catastrophic, of course, for those villages. And they've been pushing them, of course. This is not just in the Bethlehem district. Everywhere, Israel wants to consolidate the Palestinian populations into large ghettos or concentration areas. A good example of this, by the way, is in the Naqab, in the Negev, where there are 30-some communities of Bedouin villages, and Israel wants to consolidate them into 3 or 4 communities like Rahaf or those areas. And to do that, of course, they use many methods to try and drive them out. And they have done this, before successfully. Why do you think there's no Palestinians around Jaffa or, or Eilat or many areas of the Negev or Ashkelon or Bisan? Bisan used to be a Palestinian town, or Tiberias, Tabariya. All of them were ethnically cleansed. So it's a continuation of a long-term policy that resulted, as I mentioned, if I was to summarize it, I would say of the 14 million Palestinians, 8 million are refugees or displaced people, and the rest of us are being squeezed. We are allowed to use now only 8.5% of the land of historic Palestine. 91.5% of the land is off limits to Palestinian developments only for Israeli Jewish use.
Okay, that's it, I think, for questions. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today. A link to a video of this gathering, along with all the links shared today, will be available on the Kumi Now website and on YouTube in a day or so. It will be shared in the next newsletter. You can subscribe to Kumi Now on YouTube and subscribe to our newsletter to make sure you receive them. And please check out our new podcast, On the Ground of Palestine. Ryan has shared links to it in chat.
Yeah, thank you very much for hosting this. Thanks to Sabir and thanks to all of you who attended and showed interest and asked very important questions. I put the email again in the chat, info@palestinenature.org. Email me if you have other questions and would like to continue discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Mazin. Also, we would greatly appreciate it if you share this session with your friends and colleagues, as well as information on our future webinars. Next week, we will look at issues around tourism and pilgrims. Our guest will be Rami Kassis, the Executive Director of Alternative Tourism Group. We'd like to be reminded of an online gathering an hour before they begin. You can register for email reminders at kuminow.com/online using the form at the bottom of the page. We hope to see you back here next week. Thanks again and good night.